So, welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. Annika McGivern, great to have you on. So, just to introduce the audience out there who Annika is and what she's all about. Annika is a performance and exercise psychologist coming from a high-performance equestrian sport background. She's gained over 10 years professional coaching experience, combining this experience with a BA in psychology from University of Victoria and an MSc of Sport and Exercise Psychology from the Ulster University. She delivers highly practical solutions for teams and individuals with a focus in understanding the complex interaction of the conscious and unconscious mind. Annika is passionate about teaching the necessary skills to get the most from mental training in real-life performance environments. She creates and delivers the specialized training for personal trainers and gym owners to help bring the benefits of exercise psychology to the gym environment. Annika also applies her skills and knowledge in business, specializing in resilience, mindset, communication, and presentation skills. And I should also mention that you actually also guest lectured on the Masters in Coaching program at University College Cork, which I was on previously as well. So
yes, which is a fun coincidence.
we share that one. We share the guest lecturing in cognitive behavioral coaching. Yes. So
yes.
Do you use cognitive behavioral coaching, the offshoot of cognitive behavioral therapy? Do you use that in your practice a lot, or is it just one in a toolbox?
It is a toolbox, but I do find that it's a tool that I pull out often from the toolbox. I think it's a wonderful theory because I think it really underpins a lot of what we're trying to do with psychology, which is help people shift their perspectives and shift their sort of broader frameworks and schemas and understandings of the world in order to think in a more helpful and productive way. So for me, that sort of foundational idea of cognitive behavioral coaching is really useful in almost everything that I do.
Very good. And do you find this, the CBC, does it link in with a lot of the other theories or strategies or approaches you'd use with sports psychology when you're working with athletes? Or
I do actually, yeah. And the more that I continue on my work, the more I find those links actually with CBC, and I enjoy, that process of strengthening the connections between the theories. The more that you put it into action, I think the more you find all those connections, and the more you realize that all the different theories, or many different theories, do work very well together in actual practice, or that you draw from, or the best way is to draw from different theories in sort of a cohesive way. But yeah, it absolutely shows up in so much of the work that I do. And I think that it hits on sort of the foundational element of using psychology to address performance challenges. And I mean that in that it applies to athletes, it applies to people with business challenges, it applies to people who are just having some challenges in life that they need to get through. Starting with that universal framework of just understanding how we're seeing the world and how that's affecting us, how that's shaping us, how our beliefs are shaping our thinking. I find that it applies to absolutely everyone, and it can create some really wonderful shifts and results for people. Have you found the same?
I have, yeah. No, it's one of the go-to. I don't think I think a lot of people fall into a little bit of a trap with all sorts of styles of psychology. There's a personal opinion here being very controversial, but it's one of those things that, if you get too big into any of these things, it's the classic of, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I very much get that feeling that sometimes people, while CBT and then in coaching CBC is hugely beneficial and it's one of the more tested scientifically. And so there's no doubt it's hugely useful. But I also think that depending on the individual and their situation and some of the difficulties that they're trying to work through, it can be one in a series of very useful approaches.
Yes, so I would definitely agree with
that. I don't mean to immediately sound controversial there. But for example, I know like my cousin is a clinical psychologist, and he's big with CBT. But as he said, one of the reasons he's particularly effective at what he does is because he has all these other methodologies that may be a better fit for the individual or the individual situation. So I'm just intrigued as to what some of those other approaches you might go to I'm very interested in the sports psychology angle. So whether you're working with, say, business people, but maybe even focus more so on the athletes, and
Mhm.
what would be some of your starting approach, or some of the, like, do you have a particular methodology you work through when you bring on a client who's an athlete? Are there certain commonalities there? I just love to know more about that as a sports psychologist approach with an athlete in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say that I do have sort of a basic methodology that I would follow somewhat loosely. I think everyone comes to the process usually with their own unique challenge or something particular that they're wanting to focus on. And so that often sort of guides where we start and maybe where we spend the bulk of the time focusing right off the bat. But what I try and do is provide every client with a real grounding, a real sort of foundational, across the board set of skills that they can take forward and use, so that, yes, we're addressing the particular problem that they may be coming with or the particular challenge they're facing, but that they're also walking away with like a nice broad set of tools so that they feel equipped to address other and different challenges that they might encounter in the future.
Very good.
Also,
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
I was just going to say too that also what often happens is they may come with one particular challenge, and then through the work and through teaching them a broader set of skills, they start to connect with other challenges that maybe they weren't viewing as challenges, or sort of discover new ways of looking at things that maybe they didn't even realize were holding them back. So that can be a really interesting process of discovery as well.
Okay. Okay, that's very interesting, because often, yeah, I see that in my own coaching practice where there's a presenting problem and then you dig into it and that's not the cause. That's a
Yes.
symptom, if you will. Is that kind of what you're referring to, or something slightly different again? Okay.
No, I'd say that is a great way of putting it, is that often the immediate pain point or the immediate issue that they're struggling with is very much a symptom of maybe a larger problem. Not always, but often. And I think too, the work and what I really try and do is give the athlete a broader awareness of how their mental state is affecting their performance. So the more that they learn about that and the more self-awareness they get around that interaction between the mental state and the performance outcomes, so to speak, the more they start to sort of dig into themselves almost a little bit and start to connect the dots and see other places where the tools or the work would be really useful to them. What I find amazing about athletes is that they are incredibly good at getting to the meat of the problem once they have the tools, because they're already very used to performance and pressure and goal setting and moving forward and finding the information they need and problem solving because of their experience in sport. And so I really enjoy the process of watching most of these individuals kind of take the information and then like really fly with it and start to really almost sort of coach themselves in real time. It's amazing.
They sound like ideal coaching clients.
They can be. It's a real privilege to work with people like that who are already very driven and very goal oriented and in a way know a lot about themselves as a result of going through a competitive sport process, which has many ups and downs and provides many challenges and failures and therefore provides many opportunities for growth and self-learning, I suppose.
Good. And this is kind of the interesting thing in don't want to get too much just yet into the difference between maybe working with athletes versus working with people in the business sphere. But it does prompt that thought of, as you said, athletes sound really ideal in the sense that they're very internally motivated or inspired to make those changes. How to put it? Do you find that they have less resistance to some of the things that you bring to them, or some of the behavior change, or some of the strategies? Or like, because it sounds like they're quite bought into a lot of this, like, give me the tools to make me better, or is there still a lot of areas where they're like, oh, I don't want to change that? Is there a lot of resistance there still, or?
I've actually experienced both of those types of clients. I think it depends on how much exposure the client or the athlete has had to the concept of sports psychology before. There's definitely still a little bit of a lingering stigma or fear on this concept of having to like sit down and talk with someone about how they're thinking and feeling, and not being really sure how that really links to, being better at their sport. And so in those scenarios, there's definitely still some resistance or just some uncertainty about sort of what it's all about and whether or not it's actually something that's going to be useful to them. And then on the other side of the spectrum, sometimes you get the clients who they're really kind of dialed into what sports psychology is and what it offers. And they've heard and maybe seen many cases of other people who've had a lot of success or have had a real change in experience through using sports psychology. And then they come to the table like very keen and very interested and very much like, yeah, give me the tools, as you said, like, let's do this.
Yeah. It's just because I wonder, is it an easier sell in some ways to athletes, because everybody knows, the highest performing athletes in the world in every sport usually have a coach. I mean, it's often the analogy I give, that, like Roger Federer, the greatest tennis player ever, arguably, still has a coach.
Yeah.
So, it's that approach. So that even in sports, I'd imagine, as I say, they're already bought in on board that of, give me feedback, make me better.
Yes. And as you say, they're very used to that coaching relationship. They're used to being coached. They're used to going to that outside perspective for additional feedback on their, tactical and technical performance. And so I don't think it's that much of a jump then to apply that to a psychology environment.
Very cool. Very cool. I suppose the difference, now that I think about it, because that's really interesting. Of course, they're used to coaching, having had sports coaches for years, probably by the time that they've met with you. But it is quite a different relationship, isn't it? I mean, usually sports coaches have a kind of, for want of a better phrase, a parent-child. I'm the expert, you're the newbie, you're the novice, or even if they're super talented, it's still this top-down, do what I say, do it faster, do it better, Whereas you guys, that must be the difference, is it? Where you're actually more adult to adult, where again, you're talking as equals, you're talking as, you're trying to get that emotional connection with them, that element of trust and rapport. Do you find, as I said, because you did mention that it is a little bit different suddenly where you're talking about their feelings and their emotional states and how that impacts their performance. How do you go about establishing some of that rapport and establishing that trust with new clients in particular?
Yeah, it's a very good point because, yeah, as you say, even though I think a lot of that sort of top-down, do what I say, modeling coaching is starting to evolve as coaches sort of bring on the concepts of psychology into their work as well. However, I think the key difference is that with the sports coaching, it's very directive. So often the athlete isn't necessarily asked for a lot of their own personal opinions or feedback. Although, to sports coaches out there listening, that is a great technique to get your athletes involved and more motivated. But the main difference then with the sports psychology is that it's very much based in the client's interaction and feedback. And so it's potentially more of a conversation and less of a directive experience where there's just taking on instructions and executing those instructions and then getting more feedback and getting more feedback. With the sports psychology, we really need the athlete to fully actively participate in the conversation and open up and sort of bring their ideas and perspectives and what they think and what they're feeling about the situation to the table in order to really create solutions and tools and skills around solving those and moving forward. So yeah, I think it can be an odd experience for them to be maybe asked so many questions about themselves and maybe to be asked to reflect as deeply about the way that they think and feel about their experience in sport. And so again, different people respond to that differently. It's more natural to some, a little bit more uncomfortable and unusual for others. And so I think one of the techniques that I use is I try to just bring a lot of stories into the way that I explain the concepts. I try to make it as relatable as possible for that athlete in their sport. I make a big effort to, even if it's a sport that I don't have much previous experience in, I'll make a big effort to learn as much as I can about that sport, about the language, about the norms, about what's difficult. And sometimes by directly asking the athlete for that information and not trying to come to the conversation as an expert in the sport. They're the expert in the sport. And I'm there to learn about the sport, learn about their experience, and then use my knowledge to help them optimize the situation. And so I find...
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I find that is a really great way to help build the rapport.
Absolutely, yeah. Because
Hmm.
as I said, you're putting them as a highly knowledgeable individual
Hmm.
who knows their sphere very well. In that, you work. Do you work mostly with equestrian clients? Because I know your expertise in sport from your own experience
Hmm.
was very high in the equestrian realm,
Hmm.
working with horses, and that's a whole other, literally a whole other animal,
Yes.
because you're working with the athlete, but then there's this, this huge, powerful beast with its own mind
Yes.
in the equation as well. So I'd be very interested to know how that is quite different to a lot of other athletes, and how obviously there's a lot that translates over, of course it is,
Mhm.
but compared to someone who plays football or is a track and field type of athlete versus someone with a
Mhm.
huge horse
Mhm.
beneath them, how is that different?
I think the main difference, I suppose, first to answer that first question, I do a lot of work primarily with equestrians because of my own connection, and I do love the opportunity to do that. And it's it's a great place an easy place for me to step into because I do have a really deep well of knowledge and experience in the sport, and so it makes it very easy to understand the issues that those athletes are facing in an even more kind of nuanced way. I think that the main difference with equestrian sport, and we often don't think of equestrian as an extreme sport in the same way that we would think about maybe downhill racing or big wave surfing or
Right.
mountain climbing, right? But if you think about it, it has similar levels of risk as all of those extreme sports. And actually, the cross country jumping, which is an element of 3-day eventing, has been listed as one of the most dangerous sports on land because of the combined risk of galloping very quickly at very large obstacles that don't fall down if you hit them, if you fail to clear them, at speed on a live animal that very much has its own mind and can react very quickly to things. So it does create a huge element of risk, and I think that in a way, equestrians sort of go a little bit unsung for the way that they have to confront that risk and incorporate that risk into their performance challenges. And so it creates a huge level of fear that equestrians have to confront and come to terms with. They have to figure out how to accept that risk every time they get on the back of a horse and try something new and challenge themselves. And it can be a big challenge.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that actually, because I was going to bring that up, and I was wondering how how to say it, because as you said, it is one of the most dangerous, as you said, land sports.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't think about it because there's this lovely image of, oh, the noble horse, and they're such beautiful
Mm-hmm.
animals and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, I was only on a horse ever actually once, and was in
Oh, interesting.
Chile. It was in Chile of all places. And beautiful animal, beautiful place. Enjoyed the experience very much. Went trekking through a forest, but I very much got the feeling that, as you said, you're on an animal, and noble
Mm-hmm.
and beautiful as the animal is, it's still an animal, and if it decides it takes disliking to you, or makes its feelings known, you could be in big trouble. So I said it was that kind of little wake up call
Mm-hmm.
of like, let's hope we get along.
Totally.
Yes, no, I'm with you on the braveries part, because we were just going at a normal pace. We weren't galloping. So yeah, okay, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a very interesting point about the extreme sports. How do you then relate to business people? Because we're talking about highly motivated, self sort of motivated uh, athletes, and
Mm-hmm.
then more specifically self motivated athletes in a horse context where they're used to dealing with a far more fear than say a football player.
Mm-hmm.
Or now I'm just using the word. Maybe football players do have a lot of fear. I don't know, to overcome, but I'd imagine the horse more so. But how does that then translate when you're working with business people? Like, how has that helped you bring new insights to them, or insights in your own work?
I think that the real commonality across that sport and equestrian sport and business is the element of pressure
Mm,
of people wanting to be able to do their very best, perform their very best, whether that's jumping around a show jumping course or knocking down out of the park on a presentation and getting the promotion. Both of those situations are extremely high pressured, and both of them require a high level of performance for success. And so even though in one hand the worlds are completely different, in another hand they're exactly the same. And what I've noticed is that people experience pressure in a very similar way. For the equestrian athlete, the pressure is the pressure to perform well and maybe get the result. For the business person, it's the pressure to perform well within their context and get the result. And so there's an amazing amount of crossover in the experience. And what I've found is that the techniques to deal with those challenges work incredibly well in both contexts with very little adjustment.
Very good. And what are some of those techniques you most advocate? Because, there's been a big, an increased amount of interest in the last 10 or 15 years in resilience and being able to perform better under pressure. And rightly so. I mean, it's a big part of my, Goliath negotiation course. I think it's a huge benefit to people having to negotiate or sell or people just doing business in general. So I'm just intrigued as to what some of those methods that maybe some of the listeners could look into further that would help them. Yeah.
So there's a few. I suppose one of the most universal ones, I think, is applying the concept of mindset, and essentially using that to evaluate how we're actually viewing the challenge or viewing the pressure, sort of what it means to us and how the challenge itself represents our own experience. So essentially, if we tie into the growth fixed mindset theory that's been really researched and put forward a lot in recent years by Carol Dweck, you can see it explained as either you see challenge as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to learn something, that you additionally see it as a necessary vehicle to mastery, so that you see the challenge as essential, that you can't actually get to where you want to go without moving through that challenge and learning what it is you need to learn from that challenge. Conversely, if we look at the challenge from a fixed mindset, we see it as a threat to our image, that the potential failure that you could experience as a result of embracing that challenge is almost too much of a risk to take on, because in the fixed mindset, we believe that we just sort of are who we are and that there's no real opportunity to grow and develop past that. And so someone with a fixed mindset spends a lot of time desperately trying to protect their image, to appear as good as they can. And in doing so, they don't want to expose themselves to situations that could demonstrate that they've made a mistake or messed up or have just gone completely off track, because they see that as sort of an unchangeable event that will forever label them as someone who hasn't measured up. So those two perspectives are really powerful. And what I've noticed is that we tend to default into that fixed mindset if we don't have the training or the context or the understanding of what's happening as we view challenges. And I think that's very much linked into the brain's sort of natural reaction to threat, and that that older part of our brain that's just very concerned with keeping us safe. It makes a lot of sense to that part of the brain to stay safe, to avoid discomfort, to keep yourself protected. And so you're really going up against that part of the brain, I think, every time you choose the growth mindset or you choose to embrace the challenge. But learning to see a challenge that way is a really big pivotal shift in sport, and I think also in business, because it immediately shifts the feeling around it. It goes from being something that's really terrifying and quite overwhelming and difficult to deal with, and that'll feed into a lot of fears and beliefs around not being able to do it and not having the skills, which can become sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, as you know. And so the answer to that is really to shift the perspective of the challenge itself. And I think it's a really fun thing to teach people, because they get this really cool, like, whoa, aha moment when it all starts to sink in and click. And that can be one of my sort of favorite moments with that.
Very good. Very cool. And that kind of brings me on to another question I've been meaning to ask you, which is, what do you love most about your work?
It is actually that kind of what I just said.
Right.
It's like that moment where you see that you've helped someone really shift or pivot their perspective. And what I find so amazing about that is that with a simple shift, the world can look completely different to someone in an instant. It can go from being completely unmanageable, very confusing, feeling very stuck and lost and frustrated, to all of a sudden feeling interested and curious and excited about the possibility, seeing the path forward, seeing what the next step is, and all of a sudden having more faith and trust in your own ability to make that happen. And it never fails to amaze me how that shift can happen so quickly once the appropriate framework has been kind of set up and people are understanding and able to just step into that different perspective.
Very cool. Very cool. No, I agree completely. As I said, it's moving people, whatever their domain, whether they're artists or whether they're
Yeah.
sports people or business people. As you said, it's a simple human thing, that going from stuck feeling that you've no choice or very limited choice to suddenly seeing options.
Yeah.
And that's really the difference, is suddenly option versus no option. And the freedom, and then, as I said, the control and the agency that they then have when they suddenly see certain potentialities. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, just to flip it there for a minute, because we're getting all very positive and everything, which is brilliant. But I'm always interested when I talk to experts and very knowledgeable people in different fields. I'm always interested in what the common myth or maybe big misunderstanding about your profession or your industry that a lot of people seem to hold. I'm always interested, and I'm always interested to hear it so that it can be straightened out.
Yeah. I think this is a common issue, I would say, in equestrian sport, and has actually, as I first became familiar with it through my exposure with equestrian sport and sports psychology, but I now am starting to kind of see it in a lot of different areas, which I find really interesting, which is the idea that when something's going wrong, that you need to like double down and focus and try harder and like think your way out of it. So to put that in context, in an equestrian world, what we often see is, say someone is in a show jumping lesson. Mm-hmm. And a really common challenge in show jumping is finding the correct takeoff point for your horse to clear the jump in the best rhythm possible. And it's a very kind of nuanced thing, and so it can easily go wrong, and the rider can arrive at an incorrect or an awkward takeoff point. And this has the effect of often really rattling riders. And inevitably then the next time they're like, I'm not doing that again. And they like tense up and they like really think hard about it. And they get tense in their body, and long story short, it interferes even more with the horse's rhythm, and they get an even worse or another bad takeoff point, and then this process starts to build on itself. And so a lot of what I teach riders around that is this idea that you have to be able to trust in the training that you've already done, trust in your own ability and knowledge and expertise and skills, and be able to essentially sort of turn off the conscious brain in those moments and stop trying so hard and just let yourself do it. And it's a really hard thing to do for like high achieving people, because the answer always seems to be like, no, like I will this into being. And although that has a place and a role in life, absolutely, that determination and bringing the will and not taking no for an answer, within that context of performance, I find it fascinating that it is exactly the wrong thing to do in that moment. And that in doing so, we're missing the ability to just trust in ourselves and trust in what we've done up until that point, and relax a little bit and sort of surrender into the process of the thing. And so that example of the horse, that example of the horse world is, or that context with the show jumping, is that when the riders then successfully find a way back to just trust what they're doing, turn off that conscious mind, or kind of distract that conscious mind, and allow their skills that they have, that they've all spent years developing, what they do is they then fall back into that ability of just feeling the correct rhythm and finding their way to that takeoff point without having to think about it, because it's something they've done a million times. Sure. It's something that's measured or managed by the subconscious mind, and is actually better managed by the subconscious mind. And so I think that whole concept sort of applies across into different sports in very obvious ways, in terms of just helping athletes to, especially in those competition moments, or those moments where they need to perform, where they're not training, they're not trying to develop new skills, they're just trying to execute what they know how to do, that it can be a really pivotal idea for them to learn to just trust. And then in business, and similarly, I don't think we trust our own skills and our own abilities enough. I think there's this idea that we're always having to work harder and get the next skill and get to the next level and get the next qualification and get the next promotion. And we don't take the time to relax into and trust what we have spent so many years developing already.
It's a very interesting point. I mean, a lot of what you were talking about there sounds a lot like being mindful. As I said, it in some ways it's counter to what people feel brought them success in the first place. As you said, that grit, that perseverance, that I'll just shoulder my way through the storm. Nothing will stop me, and all this attitude. But the way I often explain it to people, it's often like sleep. Same as meditation. Like, you kind of like, I am now going to sleep. I will be asleep. I must sleep. That doesn't make you sleep faster. You have to do the opposite. Yeah. You have to kind of almost fall back into it, trying almost not to sleep. But it's a very interesting point. It's a very, very interesting point. Just on that idea of development, on the idea of trusting oneself, we all have ups and downs in our career, whether that's a sporting career, amateur or professional, whether that's, as I said, you're running a business or you're in an organization structure. But again, another question I'm really interested to ask you there is, what failure are you most proud of? What failure was most instructive and helpful?
It's a really interesting question, and I think we don't tend to think about failures in that light, and so it's a really cool lens to look back at your life on, isn't it? And think, okay, which failure?
It's the big growth mindset question, 100%, all right.
It is, and that really gets to the core of it. Like, if you can do that with your failures, you're well on your way to getting your head around this growth mindset thing. So I think, for me, I've got to say that there was a real pivotal moment for me when I was about 21. I was competing down in America in Seattle, and I just got a new horse I was really excited about. And he really had kind of what it took to potentially get me up to this next level that I've been really, really excited to get to. And I think that's an interesting element of equestrian sport as well, right? That there's two athletes involved. So you need yourself to be there, and then you also need the horse to be there. So it's an interesting dynamic, interesting struggle sometimes. And so I was very, very excited, and I felt like everything I've been working for was like right there in front of me. And what I did was I pushed too far, way too fast. And I absolutely just I tried to just reach out and grab that thing, even though it wasn't actually right there in front of me. It was a little further ahead of me than I realized at the time. And I was far too focused on getting that outcome that I'd been, that I'd had on my list as a big check, compete at this level for many years. And I sort of lost track of the process and lost that real necessary day-by-day connection you have to have with the process in order to actually reach that outcome. So I flew up into that level far too fast. I had 2 big crashes where I fell off my horse in I think the first 2 competitions And didn't seriously hurt myself physically, but like really rattled my confidence, really rattled it. And that was probably the first time I'd had my confidence rattled that severely. And as a result, then had a fairly disastrous remainder of my season. Like, I don't think any show went well.
Right.
It was a bit of like a spiral then. And that put me in a really challenging place. I was very kind of lost. I wasn't sure at the time what I was doing wrong. I thought I was trying to do all the right things, and it just sort of wasn't working. And I was very discouraged. But it is that exact experience that led me to sports psychology, because it was that in that moment when I was desperately trying to figure out what the heck to do to turn this around, that I remembered a sports psychology talk that I'd been at as a part of as some sort of young rider team event, I think, earlier on back when I was in Canada. And at the time, I thought it was pretty cool, but I sort of didn't really realize the full benefit of it. And I thought to myself, right, okay, maybe this is when that sports psychology stuff could actually really come in handy. So I got in touch with the sports psychologist who had done that talk, and he does a lot of work with equestrians in my area. And I think it was like 3 Skype calls, and he absolutely turned it around for me. All of a sudden, I understood exactly what was going on, and I understood exactly why it had all fallen apart, and I knew exactly what I needed to do to fix it. And it was like this absolute light bulb moment. It was like I suddenly saw this whole other world to sport that I'd been somewhat unaware of, which was the mental side of performance. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, right, as they say. And I was just totally hooked and fascinated. And so through that, and I was able to then turn things around really, really powerfully for myself as a result of taking that information on board and adding that into my training. And so that's really what started me on my whole journey of deciding to pursue it as a career when I was sort of moving out of equestrian sport full time. So it was a very difficult year, but in hindsight, it was a very big failure at the time. It felt like a huge failure, but in hindsight, it was an incredibly important moment in my life.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. I hadn't realized that's how you got there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Very good, very good. I'm just interested then, again, not to go too negative, but I'm interested in that sort of side of things. So when you're deciding who you're going to work with, or if the client is ready to work with you,
Mm-hmm.
what might some of those red flags be? Some of those little, ooh, I don't think they're ready to work with me just yet, or maybe they need to do some work on themselves or do something just before you take them on. Is there anything there that kind of you think, oh, I'm not working with you yet?
I think the only thing one of the only things that can potentially raise a red flag is if someone clearly has a very sort of misguided idea of what sports psychology is.
Okay.
If it's very clear right away that they think they're going to be able to have like 2 chats and then just absolutely, it's going to be like a silver bullet or like a quick fix. And that there's not going to be any kind of need for them to actually continually change the way they think, whether or not that's through sessions with a sports psychologist, but just sort of take it on in their own lives and apply more work to it. Then I suppose to me that comes up as problematic, because I know that person's probably going to have very limited success with the process, because they're not sort of fully understanding what it is. And they're maybe setting themselves up for disappointment because they're thinking, great, I'm going to like learn these 2 tips and tricks, and then it's going to completely change my whole experience. Now, having said that, there is the odd time where, it is just a couple of cool little perspective shifts that can sort of create some really pivotal change for people. But what I find is that happens when the client or the person or the athlete is very much on board with this idea of it being an ongoing process, of it being something that they're going to continually invest in, that they're building a new habit around the way that they think and the way that they incorporate mental training. And so there's something about the way that they can come into it which can maybe be a bit of a red flag. However, that's usually addressed with just some kind of upfront education about what it is and what it isn't, and just being very clear. And sometimes then the person's like, oh, okay, maybe that isn't for me. And then, but very often the person just kind of goes, oh, okay, I didn't realize, like that's good to know. And then, you move forward from there.
Very good. That's a lovely perspective. As you said, it's just really just setting people's expectations maybe to the right level.
Mm-hmm.
What do you believe that most don't? I know that can sound like quite a broad question, but a lot of people often, when you talk to them, when they are very well informed and quite experienced in their industry, often have a slightly unique take on something, whether it's very specific or maybe a little bit broader. What might be a unique point of view that you'd have?
I suppose maybe the first thing that comes to mind isn't specific. It's probably more of a generalized point of view on life. But something I've noticed is that I sort of really believe in finding a balance between being very, I suppose, future oriented, setting big goals for yourself, and having a plan and putting a lot of work into that plan, but then also balancing that with a real enjoyment of life in the present. And so I think if I look back over my life up to this point, I've done a fairly good job of doing that in terms of following a career path and a plan, but also doing a lot of sort of unique experiences like traveling and just sort of trying to experience all of the fun and I suppose joy and unique experiences that life has to offer. I think sometimes people get into this place where they feel that they have to grind it out and get to a certain point, and then they'll start to enjoy life, or then they'll reap the benefits of it, and they'll do all the traveling and they'll do all the things.
Sure.
And I just don't believe that. I just don't believe that I suppose is the best way, because you never know what's going to happen. You may never get to the point that nature of future goals is that they tend to keep moving into the future. And there's always a next point to get to. There's always another level to reach. And so I really believe that it's essential to enjoy the process. And I suppose it's very much linked into the sort of goal setting philosophy that we use in sports psychology and business psychology, where it's, you balance the outcome goals with the process goals, and how the enjoyment of the day-to-day process of what you're doing is what your life is. Your life is a sum of all these day-to-day moments, and the big goals are really amazing moments, and they come, but then they go, and at the end of the day they're just a moment. And so if you're living for those few moments that you're going to get in your life where you check the big goals off your list, you're just missing out on so many other wonderful moments along the way, which can be found in very simple day-to-day pleasures, as well as traveling the world and doing exciting things.
Very true. It's something, it's something that that I suppose particularly athletes are aware of more than maybe business people, because athletes is a certain a competition, and there's clear rules, and this sort of it's maybe that bit more structured than a lot of business people's lives, which is more of an ongoing thing, and it's harder. You're drawing your own rules as to how maybe you win.
Yeah,
but it's very much that idea that I said how you use your downtime can improve your uptime, where
definitely,
a lot of the top performers are much better at being either 0 or 1, whereas a lot of us are struggling, to turn off in the evenings and then be fully present and fully in it during the day. I think that's probably a commonality that we both work with people on that sort of stuff.
Definitely.
Very, very interesting stuff. If people want to understand some of the fundamentals of your area of expertise, what might be some of those resources that you'd recommend? Either books or maybe courses, or sometimes they're free, sometimes they're not. Where would you set people to?
I think that there's some fantastic reading, and there's some really, really good books out there. I think that especially seem to have come out in the last 5 years or so, that I find do a fantastic job of taking all of the kind of psychology can be so kind of up in the air and conceptual and theoretical. And so I think what's really wonderful is to find resources that ground it in kind of practicality and real life experience and connect really well to that day-to-day experience that we all have. So I really love that. Those are the people that I'm really drawn to, who do like an exceptional job of making it real and practical. And that's a real value of mine in my work, that I aim to do that. I try to learn from those people and then try to make what I teach as grounded and practical as possible. So one coach who has a lot of online presence is a gentleman called Neal. Okay. And he actually works a lot with business. I think he works a bit in sport, but I think he's primarily a business coach. And he has 2 books. One's called The Space Within, and one's called Super Coach. And he just does a really cool job of taking all of that kind of conceptual theoretical stuff about the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, how they interact, how thoughts and feelings interact with our experience and shape our experience, and how there's such a common misconception where we think that we're feeling our experiences. So the experience is directly creating our feeling of happy or sad, where often in reality, our feeling of being happy or sad is shaping the experience. Right. Little interesting flips like that. And he does a fantastic job of just like really explaining it in really cool ways that are entrenched in like stories and examples, and it makes it all very real and very applicable. So I love his stuff, his books. You can get them on Audible. I love listening to his books. He has a very relaxing, calming voice. So he's just a great guy to listen to on a Sunday morning. Or purchase the books as well. He also has a course through Mindvalley. I know you're familiar with Mindvalley. They do a really fantastic array of courses. And so they're a resource that I always point people towards if they're looking for a course type of experience, because they do a really good job, I think, of finding all the really relevant people who are really at the top of their game at the moment and bring them on board. So that's one. Actually, along the line of Mindvalley, the founder of Mindvalley, Vishen Lakhiani, has a great book called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. Yeah, love that one. Again, just really practical. Like, this is how you apply all these concepts in your life on a day-to-day basis to make the changes and see the difference. And so I love that about his book. I think in terms of sports psychology, The Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler is a fantastic book about flow. You read all these, you're like, yeah,
of course.
It's just a great one that just really gets into like what's going on with that ultra high performance, and he does a really fun job of linking it into some pretty wild stories, about a really high performance extreme sport athletes that make it all very real and very interesting. So that's a great one. 2 more books. There's an author called Daniel Coyle who wrote the Talent Code and the Culture Code.
Yes, yeah.
Both fantastic books as well. Talent Code is very much about performance in sport and in the arts, and I think a little bit about business. And then the Culture Code really dives into the cultures of business and how they shape everybody's mindsets and beliefs, and how that all works and culminates to create either a very successful organization or a very unsuccessful organization. So those are fantastic reading.
Excellent stuff. Just to ask you on that, because I know you have actually recommended, you have a page on your website where you recommend those resources and some of those resources. But I also believe you just recently put up your own little free resource course with several videos. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a free mini course. It's called How to Find and Keep Your High Performance Self. And it basically talks people, it's fun. It talks people through, it's all rooted in mindset in the what we talked about earlier about how the different perspective, how we either embracing that growth mindset or getting stuck in that fixed mindset can have such an incredibly powerful influence over our ability to perform. And so the high performance self is somebody who understands and embodies all of those characteristics of a growth mindset. And the low performance self is the self that embodies all of the characteristics of a fixed mindset. And what I think is really key to understand is that we all have those 2 selves within us all the time. Absolutely. And that every day, every hour, every challenge is we have to make the choice to be one self or the other. And in order to make that choice effectively, we have to know who those 2 selves are. We have to be familiar with what our high performance self thinks like, what they believe, how they're seeing the situation, and similarly how the low performance self thinks and feels and sees the situation. And so I created a course around that, helping people build out their understanding of who those two selves are, and then how to consciously make the choice to decide to be that high performance self, and all of the benefits that can bring.
It's a brilliant point, because what I always found with when you talk to people with mindset and growth mindset in particular, and you ask, which do you think you are? 80% of people will say, oh, I'm growth mindset. And they'll be able to list all the examples of growth mindset. But as you said, what's always fascinating is almost in the same sentence sometimes, they'll then show a fixed mindset. So, I will say, my dear mother, how she'll hate it if she hears this, but, it often sort of says, she's it's a great example. She has a great growth mindset for things that she's very good at, like speaking languages and things like this. Yet almost in the same sentence, she'll say something very self-deprecating, like, oh, but I'm terrible at maths, or I'm terrible at X, Y, Z. And I think a huge amount of people have that when they have those feedback loops that, oh, I'm quite good at this, and this is similar domain, so I could transfer some skills, so I'd probably be able to learn that and integrate that and so on. And that's brilliant. But as you rightly point out, there's that other voice in their head that they often ignore, which goes, oh, I'm no good at that. And there's no interruption saying, well, how do you know? Did you have a terrible teacher? Were you just not in the right frame of mind? Does it need to be taught to you in a different way? Blah, 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 blah. Did you actually put in the effort in the first place? All this sort of stuff. That people just go, I'm bad at that, and they'll say the same, as I said, in nearly the same space. So it sounds like a really great course for getting that clearer in your head where we're stopping ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the real aim, as you say, is it gives people or empowers them to sort of have those skills to recognize which version of themselves is showing up in that moment and responding to the challenge. And then, as you said, so often we need to be our own evaluator and get into the habit of asking yourself, well, hold on a minute, why do I think I'm so bad at that? Why do I have this idea that I'm terrible at math? Where did that come from? And to, push into it a little bit and sort of bring the growth mindset perspective to it. I think that's where the mindset stuff gets really hard. It's so, as you said, it's so easy to get on board with a growth mindset about things that we're good at or we enjoy. And it's really challenging to apply it to things that we've spent a lifetime thinking we're bad at or that we don't enjoy. And so if you can start doing that, then you're really on the path to really embracing what mindset has to offer.
Outstanding stuff. So we'll pause it there, but just as we finish off, just where can listeners or people watching the YouTube video, and by the way, I'll post the links below, but where can people catch up with you or sign up for that free course that you have, or stay in touch, see what you're up to?
So the best place to find, the most direct place to find the course is my website, which is just my name. So it's www.annikamcgivern.com. And you will find a link or a page on that website for courses, and that will bring you right into the opportunity to sign up for that free course. You can also follow me on Instagram, which the handle is @AMP_performance-psych, and I post a lot of just relevant content around using all these ideas in everyday life, in sport and in business. So if you're interested in that type of content, you can find me there. And yeah, those are probably really the two best places. And I always welcome people to reach out to me via the website. And even if they just want to have a chat and just have some questions about what sports psychology is all about, I always just do an initial conversation with people, no obligation, no charge, to see if it's something that they're interested in.
Very good. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. And you've been working like myself via Zoom or Skype for quite a while, even pre-COVID, haven't you? So
yeah, absolutely.
Geography is not an issue.
It's not, which is one of the, I suppose, the silver linings of it all, is that it has allowed us to, really expand who we're able to work with on a regular basis, which is a lot of fun. And I find that the Zoom format is great for psychology, for sport or business or whatever it is. It really does work, and you get that same kind of privacy in the conversation, and you're able to teach and learn really the same way that you can face-to-face, which is great.
Excellent stuff. Well, the very best of luck in the future, and thank you for being on the show, and brilliant stuff. Thanks again, Annika.
Thanks so much for having me, Alistair. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Outstanding. Have a great week now. Thanks a million.
Bye.
Bye.